Hey everyone, welcome back. My discussion this time concerns the interval known as the half step. It's more commonly referred to as a semitone or the minor second, although I'm going to refrain from using those terms until I get through all my discussions of the intervals at least up to the octave. That way I can go back and show how those naming conventions really apply, and it'll be a lot easier to understand at that point. So for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to refer to it as a half step. As just as a quick audio-visual sort of reference, the half step is going to sound like this from any particular note. That would be a half step ascending or going up in frequency. Or that's a half step downward or going at a lower frequency. So the half step, is kind of small and seemingly insignificant as it may be, really introduces a very huge concept into music, and that is this idea of tension and resolution. And tension and resolution is really a concept that applies to most art forms. Even if you go to a movie and you're watching a dramatic picture, and either you're going to find yourself sort of in between periods of psychological buildup, of this tension and stress, interspersed with periods of relief or resolution. At least at the end of the movie, where you have this sense of, we know what's happening now. Everything is okay. That's the same sort of thing that happens in music, and that it's sort of created with intervals such as the half step. In fact, most all music is this sort of interweaving of tension and resolution. And the further you get into music, and music theory, and more complicated forms of music, let's say jazz fusion, you can really see it all throughout there. Chord progressions are just filled to the brim with this idea of tension and resolution. There's two ways we can look at the half step, and that is harmonically and melodically. By harmonically, I mean in harmony, or where the two notes of the interval are played simultaneously, or you're creating harmony out of the two. For instance, if I play you can hear right away that is a very jarring effect that's created. It's commonly referred to as dissonance, and the opposite of that is consonance. But this dissonance is this jarring feeling that needs to resolve, or that you feel like you need to get away from, or go into a more steady state. And that's what happens a lot with the half step throughout music. Now, when you see it in context with a more complex harmony, let's say this A minor add 9 chord, you still get the same interval in there, but in the larger context of the chord, it has a very beautiful and flowing sort of sound, because the resolution is kind of inherent within it as well. Melodically speaking, the half step has this pulling motion, and what I mean by melodically is melody, or linear notes played one at a time. So rather than having them played separately, or together, you'll have them separate. Or on the same string, like so. You can hear almost right away that pulling motion. It wants to pull back to that original note. And that is really the key, that once you get into the creation of scales and how they're formed, it doesn't matter what scale, you're going to see that there's these compositions of intervals played in different combinations. And the half step plays a very important part within those. The placement of that half step within the scale, where that pulling motion is pulling to various different notes, you get different sensations and different feelings out of these scales and modes and such. So we'll get into that later. Two other ways you can look at the half step in terms of applying it to your playing or applying it to the guitar. First is geometrically, or in terms of the fretboard layout. It's important not just to understand intellectually what a half step is. It's really important to get to know how you navigate the half step. And all this is going to seem very basic, but I'm going to treat all the intervals in the same manner, and I think you'll appreciate how they all relate back to the explanation starting here. So, when we look at it geometrically, on any given string on the guitar, like where I was at the fourth fret on the G string, it's a B note, and I go up one half step, which is one fret. So one half step equals one fret, or vice versa. That's your half step movement. That applies throughout the guitar. Doesn't matter where you're at on the fretboard. If you're on any given string, let's say I'm up here at the 12th fret on the high E string, I go up one fret, I go up a half step. It's that simple. Or down. You can hear that pulling motion going up to that original note. So that's the easy part. The harder thing is getting to know intervals across strings and the shapes that they develop. Because once you get those shapes embedded in your mind, you'll be able to you start finding your way around the fretboard a lot more fluently, especially when we get into scales, so that you're not stuck in static positions everywhere. So just for example, I'm going to start on this the low E string, 12th fret, which is an E, and a half step up from that is this note F. The names of the notes really isn't that important right now. But if I go up to the adjacent string, the A string, to get to that same note, I need to go down the fretboard 4 frets to the 8th fret, and that's my half step. And so I have two motions or two directions I can approach that half step. I can ascend up the same string, or I can go to the next adjacent string, which is down 4 frets. Now played together, in terms of the harmony aspect, you can hear it right there. Now, that shape, that sort of 4 fret span there, doesn't matter where I'm at on those two strings. Any note up to that next note at the same fret span is going to give me that half step. That's kind of it seems very obvious, but later on it's going to play a really big role in finding our way around the fretboard. Now that shape is also the same shape when you get to the A and the D string, or the 5th and 4th strings. And the same when you get to the 4th and 3rd strings, the D and the G strings. So that shape, that 4 fret spread, is the same there. And then the only place that this changes is between the third and second, or the G and B strings, where you get, instead of a 4 fret, you get a 3 fret span. So from this G note, or the 12th fret on the G string here, third string, if I go down 3 frets and up to the next adjacent string, I get my half step. Now that shape, it's a little bit shorter, but that applies to anywhere on the fretboard on those 2 strings, those 2 adjacent strings. You get the same half step. And then when you go up to the second and first string there, the B and the E string, the high E, you're back to a 4 fret span. So I'm on the B string there, 4 frets down, up on the high E string is my half step. So now I've got 2 ways, 2 directions of reaching that half step. Now, again, when we get into further larger or more open intervals, these shapes, or the idea of these shapes, is going to be really important. So that is the half step. And next time we will go up 1 more fret to the whole step. Take it easy.